Cool. Okay. So today we are starting Flask. But before we jump into the weeds, I want to talk a little bit about just like kind of a broad overview of what happens like when we go to a website, right? If I just go to, I don't know, if I just go to google.com, right? I have my web browser, right? That basically how does this work? Like we have sort of like just a layman's understanding. Like we know it's not like a magic trick that's happening. What's happening when I go to google.com and I see this and I don't see like the error, like your internet's not working or something?
You ping their server?
I pinged their server, right? So my web browser sent what's called a GET request, right? Which GET is basically, it's we'll talk more about like the different methods, but GET is basically the catch-all, the most common request that happens. So when I say like refresh my browser, you see that it kind of jumps. And if you open up your inspector tools, you can see under the network tab what's actually happening. So if you look down here, and it's lightning fast, but if you just refresh, you can see like all this stuff basically loaded, right? You can see all this stuff that happened, and you see the status 200. So basically when I refresh my browser is sending a request, and without getting into the minutia of the DNS servers and all that stuff, it's basically sending a request to get to Google servers. Google servers are waiting basically for any requests to come in. And once they get the request, the server's job is to basically serve, right? It serves up the web page and I get back all of this stuff, right? I get back the HTML, I get back the CSS. You can see, and if you click on one of these, yeah,
I'm sorry, these are physical servers, right? Or are these like those virtual machine servers?
So on some sense, in some way, there's a physical machine that's running somewhere.
Because I used to work at a data center, so I'm just thinking like Google had a massive data center right next to my data center. And so like when you refresh that page, like this information, this data is it going through wire to that data center? Is it doing like a virtual machine kind of thing?
So and I don't know Google specific situation. I'm assuming Google has their own servers, but like if we were to start a website, we would probably use a service like DigitalOcean or AWS. And the way that works is there's like a big actual physical computer server, right? And we pay for little chunks of that server. So there's basically what you're calling a virtual server, and that's what it's called. It's sort of a chunk of that memory and that functionality that we pay for and lease or rent from AWS. So yeah, there is a physical machine, but Google probably has hundreds of servers running, if not thousands of servers running that handle the different requests. Yeah. So there's something called load balancers that will direct the traffic. So like if a bunch of traffic went to run one server, it would crash the server, right? So they have load balancers that will direct traffic to different servers that have basically identical copies of the website that they're all serving, and they're routing it to different places. So we're different servers, so none of the servers gets overloaded. So like when Facebook went down like a couple months ago, that was an issue where, I mean, I don't know exactly what happened, but too much traffic went to one server and crashed the server. But in essence, as a simplified version, this is basically what's happening. We have our HTML, right? And then when we have our website, we are sending a request to some server, right? That server gets the request, and if it's a GET request that's a server that's a publicly available website, it will send the request back to our client. Okay. So when like when I go to Google or any website, right, it's the same underlying simplified principle is happening. There's a server, a computer somewhere. We can look at it as a physical computer, whether it's virtual or not. It gets the request, it sends the data back. Okay. Any questions about that?
Nah, this is my bread and butter right here.
Now,
This is what I've been wanting to really learn about.
yeah, and it's cool. But just to kind of reiterate, there's a lot of minutia, a lot of stuff that's going on here. You don't need to understand like all the minor details of this. You can be you can drive a car, right, without knowing how the car engine and all this minor stuff works, right? So we can be web developers without having to know all of the network details and all of the, different OSI layers and all that stuff, right? You can, if you're interested in that, that's cool. You can look into it. But we basically just have to have sort of a broad understanding of what's going on. Okay, so with Flask, we're going to have our front end, which is everything we learned in web fundamentals. And we're going to still make the front end part of our applications, but our focus is going to be on what's called the back end. Okay, so the Flask is a Python application, a Python framework, right, that will allow us to create the back end. So we would have what's called a full stack application, meaning when we did forms, right, in web fundamentals, the forms didn't go anywhere, right? We just sort of pretended that it was going somewhere. With a full stack application, we're going to be able to write a form and then handle the data from that form in our backend, in our server application. Okay, so this is where you're sort of going from a front end developer to a full stack developer. You're handling both the front end and the back end. So the three parts we're going to worry about or concern ourselves with in this class is we're going to talk about the client, the server, and the database. Okay, the database we'll get to next week, but for this week, for today and tomorrow, we're going to be talking about basically handling things like when I have a web client, and I hit the return button, like I type in a URL here and I hit return. What happens there? How do we handle or write the back end to handle those requests? Okay. So if I type in, let's just say, where can I go? I'm just going to use my website because I know what it is. So I have a website that is in desperate need of updating, so please don't judge. So this is my website, right? So when I type in tylermaxwell.co and hit enter, my website loads, right? So this is what's basically the base of our website. Now, anything that comes after this, I'm going to refer to as an endpoint. Okay, so you'll hear me say endpoint, and I just say that out of habit. So anything I put after that would be like what we're going to deal with when we talk about routes. And you could use the term route or endpoint interchangeably. So when I say tylermaxwell.co/webfund 2021, this is something I made when I was preparing, and like I just basically made this website to prepare for web fundamentals, right? So anything after our base website is what we're going to call a route or an endpoint. Okay. Questions about that? That's just the terminology that we're going to use. Okay. So to make a Flask application, we're going to start with our virtual environments. So I asked you guys yesterday to try this out. This is where we might hit some sticking points, and things might not work. So if it's not working at this point for you, we'll meet after the lecture and get everybody working. So, but basically what you're doing is you're going to install what's called pipenv. And pipenv is a Python, I guess you can call it a package or a module that's going to manage our virtual environment. environments. Okay, so a virtual environment. Well, let me ask, what do you guys, hopefully you did the reading. What is a virtual environment? What's your understanding of what that means when I say virtual environment?
It's kind of like a virtual machine almost. Like it's just like a
It's kind of like a silo, right? It's like you say virtual machine, it is kind of like that. It's like we're creating like a partition that
Like-
keeps our virtual environment separate from the environment on our computer.
yeah, it's
Right.
like a server basically. It's like a virtual server.
Yeah, it's kind of like I mean, a server, yeah. So every time we make a application, we're going to be basically making a new virtual environment for every single application we make. And it's just a way of keeping a record of our application, that just in case like there's a breaking change that's made on one of the dependencies, we have like a record of everything that we built when we built it. Yeah, Tim.
Oh, I was gonna ask, is it similar to like RAM? So like I create a virtual machine that's partitioning in permanent memory, but the virtual environment would be akin to saying creating a virtual machine on RAM, like where it'll like disappear afterwards, but you just said you store it and keep track of it.
Yeah, so it's not quite as extreme as a virtual machine. It's
Okay.
more like because there's nothing like, it's not like it's making any sort of container or anything like that. It's sort of a way of siloing our applications so that nothing breaks. So Flask, for example, is a framework, right? And Flask is something we're going to install so that we can build a Flask application. Now, when we install Flask, Flask comes with a bunch of what's called dependencies. So when you have a Python package, you're going to basically incorporate other packages that will do some of the functionality that we don't, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel and rewrite all this functionality, right? So Flask has dependencies. Those dependencies have dependencies, and those dependencies have dependencies, and all, on and on all the way down. Right. So if one of those dependencies at some point in the future, and let me just show you so you can see what I'm talking about. So if I say pip list, I have pip env here. I don't have, you'll notice that you don't see Flask, right? So when I install Flask, I'm going to put it in a virtual environment because Flask will have other dependencies that it works in conjunction with. Like say Jinja, for example, right? So Jinja is the templating engine we're going to use. Now, if Jinja, right now they're on Jinja 2, if Jinja 3 comes out, it may break our application, right? So if I just kept everything on my hard drive and didn't do any virtual environments and made my whole application without making a virtual environment, when Jinja 3 came out and I just sort of casually ran pip update, right? My pip might install the new version of Jinja, which would break my application. So anything that I built in Flask that was using Jinja 2 might now be broken, right? Because Jinja 3 came out and I accidentally installed it on my system and now my application doesn't work. So what virtual environments do is basically create this box for our application so that all the dependencies and everything stay what they were when I made the application.
So like when you're making like you try to run the original Doom off a DOS shell, sort of kinda.
You lost me there. When you
It's like the old like Doom game, right? You can only run on DOS. So when you're making a DOS shell to run that game, that's technically what you're doing with the digital environment.
I haven't played Doom for like 30 years. So I can't really speak if that analogy works. It's sort of like
Yeah,
I mean,
like
I guess
30 years ago, this was like, I think, isn't that how you ran Doom?
on DOS. I played it on, I don't even remember what I played it on. I don't know. That may, I can't really speak to that. I don't know if that's a good analogy. I would say it's more like, oof. Yeah, I don't, I'm gonna have to claim I don't know. Yeah. But basically it's so that application, like when new versions of things come out, it doesn't break our application. And hopefully it'll make more sense as we go forward.
Also, it's not just about the application version too, right? Because let's say you want to create something that's not a web app, right?
Mhm.
Maybe you want to create like a machine learning app, right? We don't need Flask for a machine learning app.
Right.
So we're localizing these applications into their own folders so that like the machine learning stuff doesn't, get imported into the web stuff.
Right.
And then like the web stuff doesn't get imported into like the machine learning stuff.
Right. Yeah. So it's not yet. Good point. So it's not just for versioning, it's for probably every time we make a Python application, since we have this resource at our disposal, this virtual environment system, it's probably a good idea to make a virtual environment every time you make a new Python application. That way everything's sort of compartmentalized and things don't conflict. Tyree.
So does the virtual machine ever need to be like, what if, does it ever get like upgraded? Like if Pippin V ever needs to upgrade or whatever, would that mess with it, or like, or anything? Does that make sense? Because like you're saying
Yeah,
you
it
don't want
does.
it
Yeah.
to, like you want to localize so it doesn't mess with anything. But what if like the virtual needs to be upgraded or like,
Yeah. I would think that they would make it backward compatible if they did upgrade it. But so when we do this, you're going to see that when we do pip env install, it creates what's called a pip file and a pip file lock. So that will basically lock in all of the versions of all of the dependencies so that if anything does change in the future, it knows to grab the dependencies with the correct version.
Okay.
Okay. Cool. Any other questions about this, about virtual environments? So if you're on Windows, the command will be pip install pip-env. For Mac, you need to, because Mac has Python 2 still installed. So you need to specify your version of pip and do pip3 install pip-env. Okay. And then, so for Windows, you may run into the issue where you'll type in pip-env install Flask and it'll say, I don't know what you're talking about, right? What pip-env? So you may have to do, you're basically running pip-env as a module. So you'll have to say Python-m, which is telling Python to run this as a module, and then pip-env, and then any commands that we run with pip-env. So if you want to run the shell, or so let's say if you want to install Flask, you say Python-m pip-env, then install Flask. And if you want to start the shell, you'll have to type Python-m pip-env shell. So basically you're going to have to prefix all the commands they tell you to run with the Python-m. Okay, and I know some of you have to do it that way. So
it's not even recognizing the install for pip-env.
Okay, so if any issues, we'll get you working after the lecture. Okay, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to have, there might be minor discrepancies and problems with installing. Okay, so let's build our first Flask app. So I'm gonna go to Hello Flask, and I'm gonna show you guys like basically what I wish somebody had shown me when I was in a boot camp, right? You want to not just read this stuff and just passively say, okay, there's this code here, and okay, get to the end and go to the next thing, right? So let's actively do everything that they're doing here. Okay, so, and let me also say that there's a lot here. There's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of different files, a lot going on. So when it comes time to take the test, you're going to have a template of all of this code available. So the test is open internet, open notes, The only thing you can't do is look for somebody's test they've already done and submit as your own. Okay, so you're going to have access to a plethora of, my code. I mean, don't use my code verbatim, but everything that I've done, I'm going to show you how to build a template. So when it comes time to take the test, you have this code ready. And basically it's just a matter of changing variable names. So let me see if I can do this on two. See if I can get this. I can never get this to come out right. Okay, just try that. Nope. There we go. That. Cool. All right, so I have my folder structure set up. So this is day 4, README. Let me zoom out a little bit. So we're going to do the Hello Flask application. So I already have a file set up called Hello Flask, and I have a README set up. So I'm just going to follow this link. And I'm going to open this in a separate VS Code session so we can see better what's going on. I'm going to say code, whoops, code period. And then I'll move this to the side. Oops. Having all kinds of problems here. Hold on.
How'd you open up another VS Code?
Yeah, so I'm just opening it in another VS Code window just so you can see, like when I see all this like file structure, I get lost. So it's, I just open up a new Visual Studio Code window and it'll still go into whatever file structure you're in, but it's just a little easier to see what's going on if all this kind of junk is out of the way. So if you want to do that, you can. If you're fine with this, then that, whatever works for you. So I have my Hello Flask application. This is a folder, and all I have in here right now is a README, and I'm just gonna have to make this bigger. I'll have to switch back and forth. Okay, so if I say, I don't have to do the open and integrated terminal. If I have a separate VS Code window open, all I have to do is hit Control or Command if you're on a Mac, and the tilde, which is the key right next to the 1. So if I do that, it'll open up my terminal where I need to be. Okay. So once I'm in here, what the heck? I'm sorry, so let me say something.
What button was that again? Sorry.
Control tilde if you're on on Windows, and Command tilde on a Mac. So that'll just open up the integrated terminal, or you can go to the view. Where is it?
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
That's just, the shortcut is just Control tilde to open up.
I thought you did some magic there for a second.
Oh, nothing's magic. Okay, so here's my README. So we're doing Hello Flask. So we're going to go step by step here. So what's the first thing I need to do if I'm going to make a Flask app?
Put in the command thing, the pippin v thing.
Yeah. So I need to, from my terminal, I'm going to say it's pip env. Now, this is assuming that I've already installed pip env on my system, right? So I'm basically at this point right here. Where am I? Up back here in virtual environments. So I'm at this point here. So I want to say pip, no, down here, pip env install Flask. So I want to run this command to set up my virtual environment and at the same time install the Flask framework. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it in my notes. Okay, so this is step 1, create virtual environment. And I can't spell environment. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run that in my terminal. So I'm going to copy that, paste it, if I can get it to paste. No, I can't paste. Control. Oh my gosh. All right, I'm just gonna type it because it's not working. Pip env install Flask. Okay, so that again creates my virtual environment. So I cross my fingers, hope it works. And so now this is setting up the virtual environment and installing the Flask framework. So if I look at my file structure, I can see that this pip file appears, right? And then the pip file lock appears. So we don't need to worry about anything that's in these files. We don't need to change anything. But if you want to see what it's doing, basically it's setting up a kind of a configuration file. It's saying basically all the packages I install will be listed right here. So as we go and install new packages, they'll appear right here. Chuck.
Does it have to be in the Hello Flask, or can it be in the main folder, like the Python folder?
Good question. It has to be in a new folder because we're basically setting up a virtual environment. And if you set up a virtual environment within a virtual environment, then it's going to be a mess, right? So you want to make sure that you're not that. So if I make another directory right here and create another virtual environment, it's not going to know, it's going to be confused, right? So we want to have, if in your Flask directory, so let me pull this back over. So I have this, if I can make this bigger. I have my files, right? And each one of these will be a separate Flask application. Okay, so I want basically sibling directories for each different Flask application. So my files, I can't have any pip lock or any files, like any virtual environment set up in there. So every time we create a virtual environment, you're going to need to go back to the parent directory, create a new folder, right? And I probably shouldn't call it template. Let me say rename.
So can you have your Python file in the same file as your Flask file?
Yeah, as
Pip
long
file?
as you don't have nested virtual environments, you're fine, right? So as
Okay.
long as I don't have like,
You
if I,
can't
as
have
long
two
as I don't
pip
have,
files.
yeah,
Okay.
you can't have like a pip file within another pip file.
But you can have like a folder with two folders in it, and each folder has a pip file.
Exactly, as long as they're not nested within each other. So my checkerboard can be a Flask application. My Flask template can be a Flask application, but I can't go into Hello Flask, make a new directory and start a Flask application because that'll be a nested virtual environment. Jesse, do you have a question or did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm also eating a sandwich.
No worries.
So when you type in pipenv install Flask, where does it get the data? Online?
Yes. Yeah. So it will automatically go to, so pip applications are stored on the internet. Basically, it's a package management. As long as you have pip, you can get any Python packages from the internet. So Flask is one of those that it doesn't come with Python. We have to install it separately. And pip env, you could do pip install Flask, but don't do that. We want to do it inside of a virtual environment.
Okay. And it's funny, like you just say install this application, you don't get any like warnings from Windows or like, are you sure you want to do that kind of stuff or anything like that when you normally install an application or something?
Yeah, and that's the power of the command line, right? We were able to just sort of override our operating system and talk directly to and say install stuff and it just does it.
Oh,
Alex.
okay.
That pip file and the pip file lock, did that come when you downloaded pip NB?
No, so what as soon as I run, so as soon as I'm in this Hello Flask directory and I type, where did I do it? Where is it? As soon as I say pip install Flask, right?
Yeah.
It creates, so pip env automatically generates this pip file and this pip file lock.
Okay, so
And
I
that's
probably
just-
did it wrong because I don't have those. 'Cause
Okay,
I did install, but it didn't. I'm not seeing any of these folders.
okay.
I'll just get with you after, I guess.
Yeah, we'll look at, if anybody's having issues at this point, just kind of watch and we'll make sure that you guys get caught up with everything. But And we try to follow along, but if you're getting errors, we'll handle it after. Tyree, what's up?
Yeah, so just kind of clarifying that. So you're saying like you can't have like sister virtual or sibling virtual machines, right? Like in the
They can
folder?
be like on the same file, like on the same level, right? You can have a directory, but you can't have them within each other, right? So you can have them in the same file. Like you could have, like, if this is your Flask fundamentals, you could have multiple Flask applications.
So for like this one that you made Hello Flask the virtual one, right? And then is every file that you make in there gonna be virtual then? Like if you kept adding new files?
Yeah.
Or, okay, okay,
They're all going to be contained within the virtual environment. Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Cool. Any other questions? Alex, did you still have a question or?
Oh, no, I'm good, my bad.
Okay, cool. All right, so get back here. So we ran pipenv install Flask. And now to make sure that we're in our virtual environment, we run pipenv shell. Okay, so let me copy this. Go back to Hello Flask, and I'm going to put this in my notes. This. So the first step is pipenv install Flask, and then to make sure our virtual environment's running, we say pip env shell. Okay.
If we had to use, if we had to use the Python -m to install it, would we have to do that with this as well?
Yes. Yeah. So you will either run this, or if you're on Windows, you may have to run Python -m pipenv. So it's either this one or this one. Okay, and the same with pipenv shell. Some of you may have to say Python -m pipenv shell. So yeah, every time, like whenever I say you're running a pipenv command, some of you may have to tack this on the front. Okay, so let me, where am I? So this is running our installation, and then here we're activating the virtual environment. I'm just gonna say env. Okay, now to get out of the virtual environment, how do we do that?
Exit.
Exit, perfect. So it's just bash shell exit. And I don't think you have to run Python -m to do that. I think just exit will take you out of the virtual environment. Okay, so let me do that down here. I'm going to say pip env shell. And it even tells me right here, it says to activate your project's virtual environment, run pip env shell. So if I do that, I should get the command launching subshell and virtual environment, Windows PowerShell. And now I'm ready to go and build my application. Okay, any questions so far? See a bunch of. Okay, jokes about the sandwich. Okay, cool. Let's see. All right, so we got that. Exit. Oh, we're back to, so let's get back to Hello Flask. So again, so for each assignment, we're going to be doing the same process. So you'll do this 100 times and it'll become second nature. You'll just memorize the commands. Now, to get our server actually running, we're going to need to create this server.py file, and that will function as our server. Okay, so I'm going to do this line by line. So I'm going to come back to my Hello Flask, and I'm going to make inside this Hello Flask directory, I'm going to make a new file called server.py. So just say new file and just call it server.py. Okay. So in our notes, we're going to create our server application with server.py. Okay. So I'm going to paste the whole thing in our notes just so we have it. So, but I'm going to, when I do it in the actual application, I'm going to do it line by line. So I'm just going to copy this. Yeah, paste it here. Okay, so yeah. Okay, so this is just so for our reference, so we know what goes in server.py. So I'm going to take this line by line and put it into our actual server.py file. So I'm going to copy this, come back into server.py, paste it, and close my notes for now. Okay, so what is happening here? What is, we saw this before. What's
It's module, the module
Yeah.
thing.
yeah.
So it's grasping the pip file.
Exactly. So we've installed Flask in our virtual environment. So we're just basically saying, just like we can make our own modules and packages, there are modules and packages that we use that other people have written. And this is a case in point, right? So we have our Flask application. So we're importing, we're saying from the Flask module, import Flask. What does Flask, why is this capitalized? What does that signify to us that Flask, it's capital F Flask?
It's a application.
An application, but what do we capitalize in Python?
It's a class.
The class, exactly. So we're saying from our Flask module, import the class Flask. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do, the next line is this one right here. I'm going to copy that, paste it in server. Okay, so now what are we doing here? What is app?
You're creating a class.
So the class is Flask, right? But what is it called when I use my class? What am I creating when I use this syntax with Flask parentheses and
You're
passes?
creating a new
Module?
Flask, like a variable
Instance.
what do you call
User.
it? Class. So
I heard somebody say it.
The instance of the class.
Instance,
Oh.
right? So app is an instance or an object, an instance of the Flask class. Okay, so app is basically the object that we're creating from this Flask class that we've imported from the module Flask. And this is what I was trying to explain yesterday. If it doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. Just memorize this syntax, or we're going to keep it in our template. So the dunder name is just pointing to this file. So it's basically telling the class, the Flask application, to look in this file for any information it needs. Okay, so that's just the only argument that the Flask class takes, is where to look. And we're just saying, hey, look right here, look in this file.
What could be like an example?
So it's kind of like a this in HTML, right? It's telling the
Sorta, yeah. It's kind of referencing
JS
itself.
where to go.
There are, like, when you make more advanced Flask applications, you could put other things in here. But for now, and probably for the next 100, maybe 500 Flask applications you make, you're just going to be putting dunder name in here. Okay, so it would be a more advanced concept to put something other than name in here, because we're going to be creating our all of our logic in this file. And somebody had their hand up. Did I answer your question? I hope.
Yeah. I was just gonna ask what it would pull, and I'm guessing it's the file name of Flask of the
Well, so name.
Flask dunder
So in this
name?
case, name is going to be server.py.
Right. Okay.
Right, so yeah,
Yeah.
because when we run this, we're going to say Python server.py. So it's going to reference this file itself.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So moving on, we have, I can keep going to my notes. So now I have this. So let me take this whole thing here. Because
You
these lines go together.
When it says from Flash import Flask,
Mhm.
when I run it, it says that it can't locate Flask. I don't have a module.
Okay, so that it may say that, and that error might not matter. Sometimes that'll happen. We'll try to. Did you try to run the server.py file?
Yes.
Okay.
They both says Flash don't have a module.
Okay. You might not be in your virtual environment. We'll troubleshoot that after the lecture.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm taking this whole thing. So this, it's kind of hard to see it here, but when I paste it, it'll make more sense. So let me come down here, add a little bit of space. Okay, so we saw this syntax yesterday, right? With this @ symbol. Does anybody remember what this is called? Decorator, right.
Decorator.
So the decorator is, and it's a pretty clever term, because the decorator basically decorates the function below it. So just like you decorate a Christmas tree, the Christmas tree doesn't change when you decorate it, right? So the decorator just adds functionality to this function that we're writing, right? So app.route is a decorator that comes with the Flask class. So this is built into the Flask application. And basically this allows us to assign functionality to the routes in our application. So just like when we went to google.com, or when I went to my website and I typed in /web fundamentals and it served something, this will allow us to create the backend that tells what is supposed to be sent to our application when it asks for it. Okay, so when I go to my, when I have in my client and I say, go to this route, this function will determine what happens when our users go to this route. Okay. When we just have /, that signifies the root route, which means the base of our application. So if somebody just goes to google.com, right, this route would handle that traffic. So whenever somebody goes to the base of our website, this is sort of the entry point to our application. Okay. And if this isn't crystal clear at this point, it'll make more sense when we get more deeply into routing. Okay. Questions so far about this?
No, I'm just waiting for you to run it to see what happens. Because when I run it, I get like,
yeah, I'm kind of building it up, right?
Well,
okay,
well, no,
so the last part is this. So let me copy this and paste this in here. All right, so again, this is, and that happens, I think, let's see if I can fix that. There we go. Okay, so again, if this looks confusing, then don't worry too much about it. We're just gonna basically use the syntax without going into the details about what it does. So we're saying basically if dunder name equals main, we're going to say app.run, and then we're going to say, pass it the argument debug equals true. Okay, so where does this app come from?
the decorator.
Not the decorator.
that variable up there, whatever that is.
Yeah. So we define app right here. So we're saying app equals the Flask class, right? So we're instantiating a instance of our Flask class. We're calling it app. And then down here, we're saying if this condition is met, if dunder name equals dunder main, which means we're running this file directly from the terminal.
Oh, now that makes sense from something you were talking about yesterday.
Okay, cool. So that makes me feel better about yesterday. So we're saying if this condition is met, if I run this file from the terminal, do this, right? So app.app is our instance of our Flask app. Built into the Flask class is this method run, right? So we can't see the Flask class, right? We didn't write it, somebody else wrote it, but we just have to take on faith that they made this method on this class. that we're able to call to get our application to run.
So
Okay.
you're saying that's just kind of like that's just like a built-in Flask command right there?
Yeah, yeah. And we don't need to, I mean, we
App.run
can if we want, we can
debug
look at the
equals true.
class, the Flask class is open source. We can see what it looks like, but we don't need to, right? We can just say, okay, we know that when we create a Flask application, when we make an instance of this class, it's gonna have this method that we can run. And this is basically what starts our application, okay? And it's very common when you start building applications to forget this line. I do it all the time. If you don't put this line in here, you're going to say, try to run your file and nothing's going to happen. Okay. So let's say, I think we should be ready to get it started. So I'm going to say Python. And I just say server.py. Okay. I'm going to run this. If you see this come up, then everything worked. Okay. So if there's any syntax errors in this file, this is going to say, you're just going to get like it's going to crash and say, you know, where the syntax error is. So this is basically, and all servers are kind of basically fancy infinite loops, right? This is just a loop. This, you see my cursor's hanging here. It's just waiting for traffic. It's waiting for something to happen. Okay. So if I come and let me try to do this on two side by side.
Okay, mine does not do that.
Okay, if it's not working, we'll troubleshoot, and so just watch what I do, and we'll get yours fixed.
Okay.
So if I come here, if I have my browser, and I go to this web address right here, right? HTTP 127.0.0.1 is home or localhost, or it's the root of our application. And you'll see coffee cups that say there's no place like 127.0.0. It just means home. It's kind of a nerd joke. Anyway, if I go to this web address, and I don't have to type in this number, I can just say localhost. Oops, localhost 5000. Right. So localhost is the root. 5000 is the port. Usually we don't see the ports when we go to websites because it's just sort of implicit. But what's happening is our computer is running as both the server and the client. So we have a client and server running on the same device. So when I hit enter, I see hello world. Okay. And if you look in here, if you see my terminal, you can see that a GET request was made to the /, which is just the root. And then I get the 200 status, which says that everything worked. Okay, so this route, this app decorator, basically the decorator was waiting for this route, this to come from the client. As soon as it did, it executed or invoked this function. Okay, so the decorator is kind of serving the role of waiting for the traffic to come in, and once it sees the traffic, it invokes this function for us. So we never say like hello world. Oops, I think I broke it. We never say hello world _world and parentheses, right? We never invoke the function. So the route handles that for us. As soon as the traffic comes from this route, it renders it or executes it, and it returns hello world. Okay, question so far?
So would someone else be able to see that like from a different computer, or is this
No.
just?
No, this is only on my computer. I would have to put this application on a public facing server, and it would have to be assigned an IP address. So this only works if you were on my network. If you were in my house and on my network, you'd be able to visit this. But yeah, outside there's a firewall that protects people from coming in.
In what way does the app route decorate that?
So
how do those two things correlate?
That's kind of opening a can of worms that I'm not sure if I want to go into. I'll tell you what, after the lecture, we can go into how decorators work. I don't want to do it in front of everybody because it's sort of, it involves like callback functions, and I don't want to like confuse anybody. But if you're interested, I'll definitely go into it at like in a breakout room or something.
Okay.
Well, basically, to give you like sort of, without giving you like that kind of crappy answer, the decorator, this is built into the Flask class, and it's basically syntactic sugar for putting this function into another function as a callback. Okay, that probably didn't help much, but again, I'll talk more about it if anybody's interested.
Kind of made sense.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
yeah.
Robert, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just missed the last part. How did you actually run it once you got that all plugged in?
Okay, so once I get everything in my server.py file set up, the command is just if I'm in make sure that I'm in the correct directory. So let me, and again, if you're in the server, to stop it, it's just Control-C. So as long as I'm in my hello Flask directory, and I can make sure I am by typing ls, and I see my pip file lock, my readme, and then as long as server.py is here, then I'm in the right directory. And basically we're just running this like we run any other Python file. We're just saying Python and then server.py. So this will actually, all the magic that we get with the Flask class, basically, and then instantiating it as an app, we can then use this decorator, assign whatever functions to whatever routes we want, and then we just say app.run debug true, and then that will just sort of work. Now, if I have an error, right, if I don't return something, for example, yeah, my automatically crashes. It's not doing what I want it to do. Let me see if I can figure this out. Oh, no. If I return, let me try this. Okay, I want to show you like what the debug does, but I can't get it. I'm having trouble breaking it. Let's see. I don't want to spend too much time. I'll figure out how to break it, and I'll show you guys what I'm trying to show you in the afternoon session. Any other questions about this so far? Okay. So let's do. Let's get started on the next one, because I know we're getting close to the time, but let's just start. I want to encourage you to do all of these separately and go through the process of making the applications just to get the practice and the muscle memory. So I'm going to stop this, and I'm going to go back to I'm just going to close this VS Code session. And I'm going to bring my other window back. So I have Hello Flask here. Close the files, come back here, and I have another file set up for the routes exercise. So I'm going to come back here, follow this link. So I have routes, and I'm going to open this in a separate VS Code session. So I'm just going to do that again. I'm going to say I'm in with the directory that I want to open, and I just type code period, and it will open a new window, and I'm ready to go. So what is step one? I want to make a new Flask app called routes. What's the first thing I need to do?
From Flask, import Flask.
Okay, so I haven't even back another step. Very first thing we need to do
the
is
file.
Pip
Create the
Right.
Python.
create the virtual environment.
Create
So
the folder
it's-
first.
yeah, so I'm in the folder. So I need to, so as long as this folder is not nested in another folder, right? As long as I have routes separate from my Hello Flask, which I do, right? There's Hello Flask, and here's routes. So they're in separate, they're not children of each other. My routes isn't inside my hello Flask. So now I'm free to make a separate virtual environment in here. So I'm going to say pip env install Flask. Okay, then I run that. And this is going to set up my pip file. It's going to do my pip file lock. And it's basically going to create my environment for me so I can make my Flask app. Okay. And I can just do ls to make sure I'm in the right place. So if I want to, well, so what's the next step? Now I have my virtual environment. What do I need to do next?
Run or
Create your
pip
Python.
env.
Yeah, create Python file, but I want to make sure that I'm in my virtual environment. So I can always run the command called pip list. If you're on a Mac, I think you have to do pip3 list. But this will show me like what is installed, right? So if I look at it, I can see I've got dist file, pip, I don't see Flask, right? So that's a problem. So I know I need to do one more step to be able to get to the Flask that I just
Install
installed.
Flask.
I already did that.
Is it
right?
the shell?
Yeah, I need to activate my shell. So pip env shell. And if it's already running, it'll just say not necessary or it's already running. But so now it looks like it activated my shell and I can just double check. I can just do pip list. And I see all the Flask stuff. I see Flask, I see Jinja, which we're going to talk about later, pip, all that stuff. So I'm in the right place. Now I can make my server.py file. So I'm going to say new file, server.py. And what's the first thing I need to do? And again, you don't have to memorize this, but I'm just kind of just going through it just to reiterate.
From Flask, import Flask.
From Flask, import Flask. Cool. And this just imports the Flask class. Okay, what's next?
The app.
Yeah, so I'm gonna app. That's just the name of my app. I could call it Fred if I wanted to, but please don't call it app. And then what do I do with app?
Dunder name.
Yeah, so dunder name is the argument that I pass, but I need to make it an instance of the Flask class, right? So I say Flask, which is the Flask class, and then the argument I pass it is dunder name. Okay. Now, before I forget, so I make sure that it's going to work when I run it, I'm going to do the last couple lines, right? So I want to say if dunder name equals, oops, dunder main. And this is the step that'll actually make the Flask app run. So the app instance of the Flask class has a method. What's that method called?
Run.
Run. And I'm going to pass it debug
True.
equals true. Cool. So let's see. Now, just for the heck of it, I want to see what happens. So I'm going to say Python server.py, and it runs. My server starts. But if I go to my browser and refresh, I get not found. Okay. You are going to see this page 100 times in the next couple of days. When you see this page, you always go to server.py. Okay. Let me say that again. If you see this, go to server.py. Okay, because that's the problem. If you ever see this page, it's because something is messed up or missing in server.py. Okay, so develop that instinct. See this? Server.py. Okay, so what's missing?
Decorator.
Your route. Yeah, my routes, right? I've got my server running, but I haven't told it what to do when it gets to the root route, right? So I've got to tell it what to do when localhost 5000 or the root web page loads, right? So I need to say my decorator at app.route. And this is basically saying when you get traffic at the root of the application, when somebody first visits our website, do this. Okay, so what do they call it? So routes, they say, so setting up, they want to make a route called success. So let's do the root route first. So I'm going to say def, and I always call it index. You can call it what you want, but you have to make sure that for every route you define, you need to name the method something or the function something different. So I'm just going to return the string index. Okay, so now I should be okay. So now if I go back here and I see index. Okay. So you can also make this HTML. So I can say h1 / h1, save the file. And you see that as soon as I make a change, my server updates. So if I come back here and now it's running, now it's actually rendering HTML. Chuck.
Whoa. Why did we have to do from Flask import Flask on the last one, but not this one?
I think we did.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, you always have to do this. You always have to import Flask.
Where's your Flask module coming from?
My Flask.
From Flask. So it's taken from a module.
Yes. Yeah. So
That's
it's
just built in when we downloaded it, right?
That's built in. So it's pipenv is handling that behind the scenes. So we don't actually see in our file the module. It's being handled by pipenv behind the scenes.
Okay.
Yeah. Good question though. Tyree.
Yeah, so if you have a server Pi in the other, in like the Hello Flask, why are you making another one in the routes Flask if it's like the same thing?
Because these are two completely separate Flask applications. So if
Okay.
I can stop this, right? And I
It's
can
like the C
say
thing.
ls, I can cd, go back, and I can change into my, what did I call it? Hello Flask?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can change into Hello Flask. And if I look in here, so I have two completely separate Flask applications. And now that I'm in the right folder, I can say Python and run this server. And if I go back here, it says hello world. So I'm whichever Python, I'm sorry, whichever Flask application I want to run. That way it's just sort of compartmentalized. Those two applications aren't going to interfere with each other. If I make a change in one, it doesn't affect the change in anything in the other one.
So you
it's
just
sort
kind of like want one per file or folder,
Yeah.
I mean, kind of.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Keeps
Thank you.
everything separate. Yeah. So let me throw that away and check.
My bad.
Are you good? Okay. Okay. So in the exercises, they say they want us to make this route. Okay, so let's do this one. So I want to basically these square brackets allow us to pass variables within our routes. Okay, so if I say, let me just copy this and we'll go through what it's doing. I will tell you one time. Okay. So I'm going to paste this in here. Okay, so this allows us to pass information from our routes into the function that the route is defined under. So this decorator is defining a route called hello / and then the angle brackets represent a variable. So whatever comes after our root, localhost 5000 / hello / whatever, it's going to be able to pass this data into our function and then render it or do whatever we want with it. Okay, so I've defined this route, and let me run my server again. And I broke it. What did I do? Oh, I changed out. So
Is it on the
I
other one?
changed away from this. So when I closed that terminal, it killed my virtual environment. So I need to go back into my virtual environment. Okay, so as long as I see launching subshell virtual environment. So now I'm back in the virtual environment. Now it should work. And we're good. Okay. So if I come back to my browser and refresh, and in the right tab, there we go. So we can see hello. Now we see index. So the route is, so right here is our root. So anything after is what's defined after the localhost 5000. So I would need to type /hello and then whatever, right? And then whatever will be transferred into this route. Okay, so what's going to happen when I put, theoretically, if all goes well, if I put Tyler here, what should we see rendered to the page? So what we return from our function is what gets rendered to the page. So what is this right here?
Hello, Tyler.
Yeah, it should say hello, Tyler. So let's go and give that a shot. So I'm going to say /hello /Tyler. And it works. It's always fun when it works. So what's happening here, and notice that I'm printing it and I'm returning it, right? So this print statement is basically saying print to the terminal whatever's coming into our route so I can check it. And you can see that Tyler prints right down here. Okay, so if I come back and I say hello, oops, not too far. Hello, Chuck. It says hello, Chuck. And then if I go back here to my terminal, my terminal, Chuck renders here, and then it concatenates automatically the hello to whatever name I pass in, and that's what renders to the screen. Questions about anything in routing so far? Yeah, and Ed says, so Ed said a while ago to make a cheat sheet, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk you through making a cheat sheet. I made this file called template, which we're going to basically use that as we're going to build that up together. So you'll have all the code. Any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll be staying after, like, once we go into break to try to get this stuff to work.
Jesse, your mic's muted.
I heard him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah, I don't really have a question. I'm just saying, like, for some reason, I'm trying to follow along so I can understand, maybe have a question, but my questions will probably come more so once I see it working on my end.
Yeah. I'm gonna stop the morning session here. So let me just go and stop the recording.